Born on October 26, 1979, Danielle Nathaniel SIMPSON, in Palestine, Anderson County, Texas. In 1998, Simpson was arrested and charged with sexual indecency with a child. He was given deferred adjudication with 10 years probation and was assigned 600 hours of community service. The state also presented testimony of numerous instances where Simpson had assaulted women, including punching his wife in the face, fighting with his sister, and smashing her car windows over an argument that he had fondled her 9-year-old daughter, and shooting at a former girlfriend with a sawed-off shotgun. On January 26, 2000, Simpson and 3 co-defendants went to the residence of an 84-year-old female, Geraldine Davidson. Simpson, then 20, and his 16-year-old wife, Jennifer, were living with Simpson's aunts in Anderson County. Geraldine Davidson was an 84-year-old woman who lived alone a few blocks away. She was a former Palestine school teacher and the organist at her Methodist church. Simpson had burglarized Geraldine's house on at least 2 previous occasions. Along with their 13-year-old cousin, he decided to burglarize Davidson's home again. After about 15 minutes inside, as the thieves were gathering jewelry to steal, Davidson returned home. Simpson approached her from behind and held a knife to her neck. He asked her for money, which she retrieved from her purse. Simpson then directed McCoy and Jennifer to restrain the victim while he left to get a pillowcase and duct tape. When Simpson returned, he bound her hands and taped her mouth, and told Jennifer to tape her legs. Simpson then put the pillowcase over Davidson's head, threw her over his shoulder, carried her outside, and placed her in the trunk of her car. According to McCoy's testimony, Simpson drove around town, opening the trunk and showing off his victim to friends. Eventually, the 3 assailants were joined by Simpson's 15-year-old brother, Lionel Simpson, who suggested that they kill the victim. They drove to a fast food restaurant and had hamburgers and French fries, then drove to the Neches River. They opened the trunk and removed Davidson. Danielle then got a running start and kicked the victim in the face. Lionel then tied one end of a rope around her legs, while Danielle tied the other end around a cinder block, then threw the block into the water. Lionel Simpson was convicted of capital murder and is serving a life sentence. Jennifer Simpson pleaded guilty and is serving a 40-year term. Both were certified for trial as adults, but were ineligible for the death penalty because of their age. McCoy was sent to the Texas Youth Commission and paroled in 2007 at age 21 to serve the remainder of his 13-year sentence under adult parole supervision. Danielle Simpson was charged with the offense of capital murder committed in the course of committing or attempting to commit kidnapping. The evidence admitted during the guilt phase of the trial established that there were 3 parties to the victim's initial kidnapping: Simpson, Jennifer Simpson, and Simpson's 13-year-old cousin, Edward McCoy. All 3 lived with McCoy's mother and sisters in a house a couple of blocks from Geraldine Davidson's house. McCoy testified that, on the morning of the offense in January 2000, Simpson asked him if he wanted to go with him to burglarize Geraldine's house. McCoy agreed. Simpson, Jennifer, and McCoy all walked around the corner to Geraldine's house. After knocking on the door to see if anyone was home, Simpson went into Geraldine's garage, got a hammer and pick, and broke a window. Jennifer climbed through the window and then went around and opened the door. Once inside, Jennifer took a ring and some money, and Simpson took a watch. About 15 minutes later, Geraldine came home. When Geraldine entered the kitchen, Simpson approached her from behind and held a knife to her neck. He asked Geraldine for money, which he then retrieved from her purse. Simpson directed McCoy and Jennifer to restrain Geraldine while he left to get a pillowcase and duct tape. When he returned, Simpson taped Geraldine's mouth and bound her hands behind her back and told Jennifer to tape her legs. Simpson then put the pillowcase over Geraldine's head, threw her over his shoulder, and carried her outside. Simpson unlocked the trunk of Geraldine's car and placed her inside. The three climbed in Geraldine's car and drove to a couple of different locations to buy drugs. McCoy described Simpson and Jennifer as acting normally and having a good time. After purchasing marijuana and making an unsuccessful attempt to buy some crack cocaine, the three drove about 10 miles from Palestine to Grapeland to visit Simpson's aunt and her daughter, Shay. McCoy testified that Simpson opened the trunk and showed Geraldine to Shay. When Geraldine asked for her medicine, Simpson told her to shut up and slammed the lid closed. The rest of the afternoon, Simpson drove around in Geraldine's car visiting and congregating with various friends in Palestine, occasionally opening the trunk to show off his victim. Jennifer used Geraldine's cell phone throughout the day. McCoy's following testimony is similar to objected to hearsay statements. Then Lionel got the rope and tied the rope around her legs, and he got the other half of the rope and tied it around the brick and threw the brick in the water. Then Lionel got her hands, and Simpson got her legs and started swinging her and chunked her in the river. Others testified that later that night, Simpson rented them Geraldine's car to use for a couple of hours in exchange for drugs. Also entered into evidence was a letter written by Simpson to a cousin in which Simpson claimed he was just the watch-out person and driver of the car, and accused Jennifer and McCoy of putting Geraldine in the trunk and throwing her in the river. Simpson stated in the letter that he and Lionel remained in the car. Geraldine Davidson's body was found in the water by a passing motorist. Simpson's co-defendants in the case included his younger brother, Lionel Simpson, his wife, Jennifer Simpson. McCoy has completed his sentence. Lionel Simpson was tried as an adult and is currently serving a life sentence for capital murder. Jennifer Simpson pled guilty after her August 2000 trial had started and was sentenced to life in prison. She will be eligible for parole after serving 30 years of her sentence. After failing to win some of his appeals, including one that contended he was mentally retarded, Simpson wrote a letter to the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals asking for permission to waive his remaining appeals. "I'm tired of being in an institution that's unjust, degrading, and corrupted," Simpson wrote, whereas on the other hand, "I'm tired of struggling to survive in a system that's highly injustices. I'm ready to die. If I can't be free, kill me." In June 2009, a federal judge determined that Simpson was mentally competent to waive his appeals. The courts then denied efforts from his lawyer and relatives to intervene and continue his appeals on his behalf. In a second petition to the court in July, Simpson wrote, "I'm tired of being imprisoned in a system that's devaluated and struggling to survive under the cruel and unusual punishments of an unjust institution better known as Texas death row here on the Polinsky unit in Livingston, Texas. I want to drop my appeals because I don't have no family support, care, nor communications coming from my mother or sisters, and providing that all my support comes from overseas friends. I greatly appreciate the unconditional love and support they've provided to me over the years. Meanwhile, being locked up in an isolated solitary cell of confinement 23 and 24 hours per day isn't justice, nor is it considered living. It's cruel and unjust. Therefore, I'm really looking forward to my execution, because it's just me against the world. After writing the letter to the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals asking for permission to waive his remaining appeals, an execution date was set for November 18, 2009. A few weeks before his scheduled execution date, Simpson reversed himself and allowed lawyers to try to have his execution halted. Lawyers filed claims that Simpson suffered from a debilitating mental illness and possessed diminished intellectual functioning, offering Simpson's reversal on dropping his appeals as proof. The courts rejected these late appeals, and the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles also denied requests for clemency filed by the attorneys. Danielle Nathaniel SIMPSON, 30, was executed by lethal injection on the 18th of November 2009 in Huntsville, Texas for the abduction, robbery, and murder of an 84-year-old woman. Danielle Nathaniel SIMPSON spent 9 years on death row. I want to tell my family I love y'all, Simpson said in brief comments while strapped to the death chamber gurney. I'm going to miss y'all. I'm ready. He shook his head and raised it as the lethal drugs were administered. Gasped a couple of times, and then his body trembled for several seconds before he slipped into unconsciousness. He was pronounced dead at 6:32 p.m. 9 minutes later. Simpson was the 22nd Texas prisoner to be executed in the year 2009. Simpson's execution was attended by members of his family and his victims. In his last statement, he expressed love to his family and one of his attorneys. He did not acknowledge his victim's family. His final meal was 4 pieces of fried chicken, gravy and biscuits and milk. Thank you for watching Death Row.